was sunny here this morning. Cold, but sunny. And unfortunately, so sunny that we've lost 4 chickens this week under my watch on the farm.
All 4 of them?
First it was one, then it was another, and then last night the other 2 never came home. So I'm assuming that they met a couple girls and they went to Doofer for the night. Hopefully they'll make it back today. We'll see. I threw them out there scratched this morning. I'm like, please God, get home before the family gets back or I am so screwed.
Oh, man.
Well, just go get more chickens. They look suspiciously alike.
It doesn't work that way, Mercedes. Well, and as I told you, there's like 20 more of them in the garage. I'm like, oh my God, you guys have no idea. Like, as soon as I let you out, you're not coming back. But I don't want to tell them yet. Okay. Well, one of the things I'm going to try to do today is get some redemption from Kelly Ham about my handwriting. I doubt it's going to work, but I'm going to try.
Since this is
I
the
think you
beginning
should
of
just type.
I know, but you know, you're kind of like the ghost of my mother, and I am in revolt constantly. All right, so today's sermon is going to be on this word. You know, people ask me, how do you come up with these ideas? And people have been asking me this for a long time, especially with my almost 15-year history of writing my Sunday blog. Never missed a Sunday in 15 years, I might add. But you know, where do you get these ideas from, man? Like, what's going on in that, you know, in that closet that you're carrying around on your shoulders? Like, oh man, I don't know. I always just say God whispers. But this value thing came up this week, and it was interesting because it came up because I was in a couple of very important conversations, not about real estate money stuff. It was actually about personal stuff. But I found myself asking a question that I often ask of clients who are just in a moment where they need to have the question, and you've heard me ask this question before. I'm going to write it down. I want you to write it down too. And the question is, what do you want? Okay, that's a super important question. And that is a question that is at the root of almost every decision that we make about anything at any moment during the course of our lives. And when I say anything, you know, I'm talking about money, relationships, career, sex, family, doesn't matter. Okay? That is always the core question. And if I was going to take that question and summarize what I have learned is what I would just refer to as the universal answer to that question, it's this word right here, the word value. Okay? Now everybody's got a little bit different interpretation of the word value. Okay? But the more I pondered this, the more I thought about it, I had a few epiphanies, a couple of insights, if you will. Okay? And one of those epiphanies was value is something that we measure at the end. Okay? That's where value is measured. And I think that is an idea that applies to business relationships. It applies to tenants. If you're a landlord, it applies to investments. It applies to a lot of things, okay? So I'm pretty rooted in this deal. And if you've ever read the book, and we've talked about it a little bit before on this call, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I didn't look this up, and I should have, but I think it's habit number 3. And the habit, I could be wrong about that. Didn't look it up. But the habit is called begin with the end in mind. And I read this in the 80s, so I never forgot that. So the basic idea is before you set out on a metaphorical journey, okay, so if you're a realtor, before you list a house, before you sit down for a listing presentation, and again, these are big hat ideas that apply to almost every department of life. You want to begin at the end, okay? And that's about point of view. It's about mindset. It's about consciousness. And it's about intention. And that kind of was the next so-called layer of the onion that I peeled as I was wandering around thinking about all this stuff. And that is that this notion of value and creation and all this kind of stuff we're kind of talking about right now, it starts with your intentions. And intentions are a really important thing, okay? Because intentions really are the first answer to the big tent question of what do you want? And intentions come from a lot of different places. If you are a fan of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I'm a huge fan of, I'm not going to show it to you today, MASLOW if you want to look it up. But what he argues is that all humans are always in a process of satisfying needs, and they are satisfied in a hierarchy. And your most basic need at the bottom is for your core survival, and your top need is for self-actualization. And there's a few more in the middle, okay? But that's all very much rooted in intention as well. And intentions can be conscious or subconscious, okay? But intentions rather, are only half the equation, okay? There's a second piece to this whole thing. And again, we're trying to walk the road to a place called value. And the second thing is your actions. Okay? And you need both. You have to have both. So one of my favorite quotes is, all things are created twice. The first creation is the mental creation. That's the intention. And the second creation is the physical creation. And that's the action. And you can't have one without the other. You need both. But oftentimes what happens with people is that we're wandering around doing this thing called life, and most of us try and do our best, and some of us are just barely hanging on, and there's peaks and there's valleys and ups and downs and joy and sorrow and just, the whole panoply of the human experience. But when we talk about these two things, these intentions and these actions, we oftentimes run into a stone wall. And I've seen this a lot in people. I'm very much an observer, and I try to become an observer of my own life. So one of the things that I did when I was in Pullman, of all places, was I studied French literature, believe it or not. I have a college minor in French literature that I got in Pullman, Washington. How completely ironic is that? But one of the things that we studied was a dude named René Descartes, okay? And I probably get my century wrong, but he was like from the 1500s or 1600s, something like that. And he came up with this idea called dualism. Okay, I'll write that word down. It's actually a pretty good word. The word is dualism. Okay, like dual, and then it's an ism, like a lot of isms. And so the premise of dualism goes like this. The observer becomes the observed. So humans have an endowment that no other animal in all the phylums of animals on planet Earth have, and that is the endowment of self-awareness. Okay, we have that ability. And like a lot of other things in life, it's a muscle. And if you exercise it, it becomes stronger, and if you don't, it atrophies. But I'm just kind of telling you right now, we all have this thing. It's just a question of degrees of how much we use it, okay? So if I go back to these two words here, if I go back to intentions and I go back to actions, the stone wall that we oftentimes run into with these two words is another word, and that word is alignment, okay? So the problem that we run into oftentimes is when our intentions and our actions are not aligned. And there's a whole lot of us running around out there, bumping into these stone walls, as I call them, and we're all suffering from the same malady. It's because we don't have alignment between these two things, okay? Now, I actually wrote a blog about this week, so I've spent some time thinking about this. And as I pondered it some more, I want to make sure that I'm really clear with you about what I've discovered is the sequencing of these things, because they actually occur in a sequence, and it's very simple. So number one is your intentions. And number two is your actions. And what happens third is this thing called alignment. Okay, and they do occur in that order, and you should think about them in that order. Now, is there going to be a little bit of cross-pollination from time to time? Of course there is. Being a human being is a messy experience if it is nothing else. But again, we have this thing called self-awareness that, again, we exercise in different degrees depending on who we are, but hopefully all aspire to become stronger today than we were yesterday, and so on and so on and so on, okay? All right. So I'm going to go back to the beginning, okay? And I'm going to go back to the first thing that I said, which is these things are measured at the end. And this is why I argue again, you want to begin with the end in mind. Now, if I was to take this little phrase right here that I'm borrowing from Stephen Covey, I would call that set of, let's see, 6 words in the collective, this really is kind of the full circle thing with your intentions. All right? That's really what it is. Okay? All right. That's part 1. And now I'm going to go to part 2.